world leaders are meeting in Poland to discuss what can be done about the global climate change. Uganda recruits women to participate in a trial of an injectable antiretroviral drug to replace a popular medicine used to treat and reduce the risk of HIV infection. And energy experts urge Africa to use more of its gas reserves to fuel economic development. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent McCorry. This is Africa 54. Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari has doused any erroneous reports that he is dead and has been replaced by a lookalike from Sudan. Buhari squashed those online rumors Sunday when he met with the Nigerian diaspora in Poland, where he's attending the United Nations Conference of Parties 24 Climate Summit. The president told his fellow Nigerians, and I quote, "It is really me, I assure you. And of course, I will soon celebrate my 76th birthday and I will still go strong." Now, according to a statement released by his spokesman, the rumors popped up after the president spent much of 2017 in London for treatment of an undisclosed illness. Buhari says the people who started the rumors about him are ignorant and irreligious. More now on the Conference of Parties Climate Summit underway in Poland, where world leaders are meeting in the heart of the country's coal mining industry to discuss what can be done about global climate change. The two-week-long meeting comes amid a series of reports saying that climate change processes are in full swing and that some may be unstoppable. But as viewers Ladita Hoke reports, a consensus on reducing pollution and other factors believed to be contributing to climate change remains elusive.
Tens of thousands of protesters marched in Brussels Sunday ahead of the climate conference in Poland to call for international solidarity in the fight against climate change.
The goal of this demonstration is to put pressure on political leaders to take concrete measures to limit climate change and adopt measures for the environment.
Meanwhile, in France, violent demonstrations on Saturday in Paris against President Emmanuel Macron's energy policies left more than 250 people injured, and hundreds of others were arrested. Macron has put environmental protection at the heart of his political agenda, but switching to clean energy comes at a cost to voters, including higher gas prices and carbon taxes. Activists blame the voter backlash on a lack of education about the climate change and say the industrial leaders benefit from it.
It's the minority of the rich, the 1% that is owning these factories, that is doing all this unethical stuff, and they are the least affected by it because at the end of the day they have so much money, they can escape, they will always find a way to do stuff, but it's really damaging simple farmers in Africa and Asia who have nothing but a field of potatoes, who's going to be completely overtaken by the sea.
About 200 leaders are attending the 24th Conference of the Parties, or COP24, on climate change. The United Nations event is taking place at the International Congress Center in Katowice, next door to the city's Coal History Museum, a reminder that Poland still relies on the high-polluting fossil fuel. U.S. President Donald Trump is not attending. He has said he doesn't believe the science behind climate change and is withdrawing the United States from the 2015 Paris Agreement on limiting carbon emissions.
In some societies, they're saying, it's either climate or jobs. It doesn't go like that. For example, renewable energies, there are very strong and reliable data saying that renewable energy is going to create millions of new jobs.
Scientists say that even a solid progress in Katowice on the Paris goals may not be enough to prevent runaway global warming, as some of the processes that have begun are irreversible. Reports predict that excessive heat, droughts, and rising sea levels are likely to make some parts of the Earth uninhabitable. Zlarica Hoke, VOA News, Washington.
And we earlier mentioned President Buhari. Although he is attending the climate conference in Poland, is keeping a close eye on his nation's rising unemployment numbers, which jumped by nearly 30% this year, climbing to 16 million, according to a November report by the National Bureau of Statistics. Another 2 million are expected to be unemployed by the end of the year. The negative trend comes as Nigeria this year overtook India as having the world's largest population of people living in extreme poverty, just ahead of February presidential elections. Timothy Obiezu reports from Abuja.
Nigerian Josh Okere prepares to hit the streets again looking for work. For nearly 6 years since graduation, he's been seeking employment.
You set out from your house in the morning, not knowing where you're going to. You're just having that hope, that belief that when you go out, you'll find something.
Nigeria's official unemployment figures jumped by 30% this year to 16 million, with another 2 million expected by the end of the year. But less than 40% of Nigeria's nearly 200 million people are fully employed. Economist Eze Onyekbere says unemployment cuts across Nigeria's economy.
It's also a question of the policy choices you make in your trade policy, in your labor policy, in your industrial policy, even in your education policy, your health policy. It's just a demonstration of the fit that people have in your economy and how productive it is and the quality of goods and services you are producing in the country. So we have a government that is, with all the greatest respect, that is virtually clueless about economic policy.
Nigeria overtook India this year as having the largest number of people living in extreme poverty, 87 million according to the Washington-based Brookings Institution. Nigeria's February elections are likely to see unemployment and poverty dominate the agenda of political parties seeking votes. But political analyst Lanre Osho says new economic policy proposals are unlikely.
Those who are watchers of Nigerian economy will have noticed that the economy has been fixated for a while. You know, we have a very peculiar policy in Nigeria that freezes our economy around elections.
Nigeria edged out of its worst recession in nearly 3 decades in September last year and made bouts of economic growth. But unemployment and poverty have yet to see a positive impact. Nigeria needs to create 4 million new jobs per year to reverse the negative trends, a huge challenge for whoever wins February's elections. Timothy Obiezu for VOA News, Abuja.
To East Africa now, Uganda is recruiting women to participate in a trial of an injectable antiretroviral drug to replace Truvada, a daily pill that has a low adherence by its users. Now, the trial now in its third phase will assess if the new drug, cabotegravir, is safe and can further reduce the risk of acquiring HIV. Alima Thumani has more from Kampala.
Ugandan sex worker Hajira Bate knows to put her health and her life ahead of money and to reject clients who refuse to wear condoms. But even for those who are careful, like Bate, contracting HIV, the virus that causes AIDS, is a high risk.
We had many issues with condoms because sometimes condoms burst, and sometimes because of the nature of the work we do and the dangers of the work we do, sometimes we can see, sometimes there are incidences and scenarios where sex workers are raped.
To reduce the risk of AIDS, Uganda last year launched the daily use HIV prevention pill Truvada. Uganda's Ministry of Health says there are 8,400 people using Truvada, including sex workers. The pill is up to 90% effective, but only if users can get past the stigma and maintain the routine of taking it every day.
If women do not take this pill regularly, compared to men, they are not able to retain most of the Truvada in their body. So it's very important that you give them options.
The option Uganda has put to trial is the injectable drug cabotegravir, which only has to be taken every 2 months. 3,200 women in Botswana, Kenya, Malawi, Swaziland, South Africa, Uganda and Zimbabwe are in the third phase of the drug's clinical trial. Dr. Joshua Msinguzi is Program Director for the Uganda Health Ministry's AIDS Control Program.
We hope it will be successful, because then there you will be able to have a stronger protection, because you will have removed the challenges around adherence. And that maybe in the long run you'll get stronger programs. But as of now, we are still using the oral daily tablets, but for high-risk populations.
The hope is that the less frequent need to take the drug will make it easier to prevent the spread of HIV, especially for those groups at highest risk. Halima Athmani for VOA News, Kampala.
Well, the U.S. Embassy in Congo's capital, Kinshasa, has been closed for more than a week due to what it says is credible and specific information of a possible terrorist threat. A Democratic Republic of Congo spokesman last week said U.S. officials were keeping the government in the dark and questioned whether the threat was an imaginary alert. But in a news conference on Friday, Foreign Minister Leonard Shea Okitundu, who met with U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of State Elizabeth Fitzsimmons last Wednesday, said the threat was real. For more on the situation, viewers Anita Powell joins me by phone from Kinshasa. Good evening, Anita.
Hi, Vincent.
Now, we haven't heard so much. I mean, there's not as much information coming from there. You are in Kinshasa. What are you hearing?
I'm actually in central Kinshasa right now, about 3 blocks from the U.S. Embassy. And I'm hearing about as much as you are, which is to say very, very little, which is unusual, to say the least, in a town like Kinshasa where information travels fast. The bottom line is the U.S. Embassy is repeating these points that they received a credible threat, the embassy is closed, end of story. And so everybody's interested and confused.
Now, some people are saying this could be related to the upcoming elections there. What are you sensing from the streets of Kinshasa? Do people seem to be aware of any of such threats? Are they concerned at all?
That's a great question, because the Electoral Commission is a block from the U.S. Embassy, and there's no visible extra security either outside the Electoral Commission, outside the U.S. Embassy, or outside any of the government offices in this area. So if it is a credible threat, the Congolese government is not visibly responding to it. But it is true elections are happening at the end of the month, and they will probably be tense and fraught with lots of emotion. And that is, of course, a concern to anybody who's keeping a close eye on this country.
And indeed, talking about tense, we saw some protests the other day, last week. Generally, from where you've traveled around the DRC, what are you seeing? What are the main issues there? What are the concerns of the people of the DRC?
Well, let me start by just saying that the Democratic Republic of Congo is the size of Western Europe and about as diverse. So I think that's quite important to remember. I went last week, to the eastern part of Congo, which is under the throes of the worst Ebola epidemic that Congo has had. So obviously that is a huge concern. But elsewhere in Congo, if you're talking generally, if you just pick a Congolese person at random, chances are that person will say, I'm concerned about high unemployment, I'm concerned about the economy, I'm concerned about basic services, about health, and about infrastructure, because these are concerns that are easily visible everywhere you go in this country. The infrastructure really does need to be bolstered and built upon, and this is hindering progress in this country, and I think that's a pretty universal need, and something that's coming out in this election very clearly.
Anita, thank you very much for filling us in on what's going on in the DRC. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
That's viewers Anita Powell reporting from Kinshasa in the DRC. Well, energy experts are urging Africa to use more of its gas reserves to fuel economic development. The group gathered in Washington to discuss the role of natural gas in helping to meet the continent's electricity, health, and environmental goals. The meeting coincides with the release of a report funded by Africa 50, which includes the Africa Development Bank, 2 African central banks, and 27 African countries. Here's viewers Mariama Diallo.
In the new report, energy experts say there's tremendous potential for exploration and production of the vast natural gas reserves on the continent. Alain Ebubisse, CEO of Africa 50, talked about the findings at Washington's Atlantic Council.
In Africa, we have over 7.5% of the world's known gas reserves. And we're sitting on this bonanza.
He tells VOA that Africa 50 shareholders have committed $850 million so far to rev up the energy industry.
Africa has to use a bit more of its gas reserve to fuel its economic development. And I believe that Africa 50, working with other investors, can invest in those midstream, downstream gas pipelines, gas distribution networks.
As the African population continues to grow and the continent's economy continues to expand, the energy sector must keep with supply demands now and into the future, experts say. Former U.S. Secretary of Energy Ernest Moniz is president of Energy Futures Initiative, which wrote the report.
In terms of the climate and the environmental impacts, the reality is that Africa today uses about 45% coal and oil for electricity. Electricity use is going to grow dramatically. If that grows with coal, it will be very, very bad in terms of carbon footprints.
But Muniz says maximizing the potential of natural gas doesn't exclude the development of renewable energy sources as well.
I believe that natural gas deployment will support renewables deployment. The real challenge finally is going to be how do we co-develop the gas markets and the gas infrastructure to satisfy the needs of these growing economies.
Ebubisse says private sector investment will be needed to meet growing demand.
The game changer today is that there is a consensus among policymakers that they need to do the right thing to attract private investment, because everybody understands that public investment is not enough to bridge that infrastructure gap in the gas space.
Andrew Kamau with the Ministry of Energy and Petroleum in Kenya urges policymakers to move quickly.
Don't forget, capital has a shelf life. If it's not welcome in your country, it will go somewhere else. If you can make decisions quickly as a government and as the bureaucracy, you will attract more people to your country to invest.
Meanwhile, experts say the continent's vast potential remains untapped. Mariama Diallo, VOA News, Washington.
A Kenyan charity held a pageant on Friday for helping people with albinism in a bid to affirm the dignity of a group that has faced discrimination, violence, and even murder because of their hereditary condition. The competition for the 30 participants was organized by the Albinism Society of Kenya in conjunction with the partners in Uganda and Tanzania. The pageant winners say they will plan to use their new roles to raise awareness among the public and influence people in authority to draw up guidelines that will help end discrimination. The winners of the Mr. and Miss Albinism titles received cash prizes and will act as ambassadors for partner organizations for 1 year. Albinism is a rare, non-contagious, genetically inherited condition that leads to a lack of pigmentation in the hair, skin, and eyes, causing vulnerability to the sun and bright light. The pageant, which aims to overcome that stigma, was titled Accept Me, Include Me, I Can.
This region has lost over 200 people with albinism as a result of the killings. So I really thought that then maybe people need to understand who we are, to see the true colors of ourselves, and also really to ensure that persons with albinism also have an equal opportunity, especially in a self-definition activity with regard to the arts. For example, in terms of beauty, people don't think we are beautiful, don't think we are handsome, and this has a very big impact because you find there's a vicious cycle of single motherhood. We are brought by single mothers because our fathers take off.
Well, people with albinism are frequently shunned, and in recent years, hundreds have been attacked and even killed in various parts of Africa. We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we covered. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vince McCory. Still ahead on Africa 54, tributes and remembrances of America's 41st president pour in from across the country and around the world. But first, a look at Monday's headlines.
In Nigeria, President Muhammadu Buhari says he's not dead and has not been replaced by a lookalike from Sudan. He says people who started the rumors about him are ignorant and irreligious. In South Africa, A-list celebrities paid tribute to late President Nelson Mandela at the Global Citizen Festival in Johannesburg as they marked the centenary of his birth. In Nigeria, cheering fans in Abuja greet the women's football team, the Super Falcons, after the team wins a record 9 Africa Women's Cup of Nations title. Finally, in Kenya, a charity held a beauty pageant late Friday for people with albinism in a bid to affirm the dignity of a group that has faced discrimination, violence, and even murder because of their hereditary condition. That's all for today. Thanks for watching.
Washington is preparing to receive former U.S. President George H.W. Bush, who will lie in state at the U.S. Capitol this week after dying peacefully on Friday in his home state of Texas at the age of 94. As viewers, Michael Bowman reports, tributes and remembrances of America's 41st president are pouring in from across the country and around the world.
Well, I wanted to report to the American people on some of the latest developments related to the situation in the Soviet Union.
He presided over the end of the Cold War, led America's last decisive war victory, and served as president, vice president, CIA director, ambassador, lawmaker, and Navy combat pilot. George H.W. Bush is far from forgotten. From the current president,
he's a terrific guy, and he'll be missed, and he led a full life and a very exemplary life, too.
To ordinary citizens, Americans are pausing to reflect and remember.
War hero, gentleman, statesman, loved by all, was a great aggregator. I love the fact that the Clintons and the Bushes became great friends, and I hope that we get more of that type of person going forward in the future.
Bush's vision, stated in his successful 1988 presidential campaign of a kinder, gentler nation, stands in stark contrast to today's bare-knuckle partisan politics and the unfiltered tirades that saturate Twitter.
A life of honor, a life of honesty, a life of total concern for the American people. He was a patriot. He demonstrated that in war. He demonstrated that in peace.
He really got a lot done, and he did it with great skill, and he knew foreign policy. He understood it. He managed the end of the Cold War peacefully. It ended with a whimper, not a bang.
Foreign leaders also are paying tribute to the elder President Bush.
He was the father, or one of the fathers of the German unification, and we will never forget that.
Not everyone remembers Bush fondly, especially some Iraqis who saw their country expelled from Kuwait in 1991.
History will not honor Bush Sr. because he attacked a peaceful nation that never challenged America. The airstrikes were a disgrace and will remain his legacy.
Good afternoon. Thanks for coming.
Bush lived to see his son, George W. Bush, become president 8 years after leaving the White House, extending the family's deep and enduring imprint on America and the world. Michael Bowman, VOA News, Washington.
Asian stocks rallied Monday. On the news, the United States and China, the world's two largest economies, will not impose any new tariffs during a 90-day grace period, during which the two sides are to negotiate a detailed agreement. In early trading Monday, China's main market index jumped 2.7%, and the Hang Seng in Hong Kong added 2.8%. Japan's Nikkei 225 index climbed 1.4%. The U.S. and China agreed to a small truce in their escalating trade war after a meeting between Presidents Donald Trump and Xi Jinping following the G20 summit in Argentina. China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs says the two leaders have agreed to work towards removing all tariffs.
Actually, the consensus reached by the leaders of our two countries is to halt the imposition of new tariffs. And at the same time, the two leaders of both sides instructed their economic teams to intensify talks towards the removal of all tariffs that have been imposed so that they can reach a mutually beneficial win-win agreement.
Well, President Trump, speaking to reporters on Air Force One after departing Argentina, says the agreement will go down as one of the largest deals ever made. The White House says Trump agreed that he will leave the tariffs on $200 billion worth of Chinese products at the 10% rate and not raise it to 25% on January 1st, as he has threatened. China will agree to purchase a not yet agreed upon but very substantial amount of agricultural, energy, industrial and other products from the U.S. to reduce the trade imbalance between our two countries. That's according to White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders. Now, viewer contributor Greta Van Susteren traveled to the G20 summit in Argentina, where she spoke with President Trump in Buenos Aires. Here is part of our interview with Mr. Trump.
As you call out China as one of the countries you say is ripping off the United States, China's global footprint is expanding. They're all over North Africa. They're building a huge port in Pakistan. They have great deals, investment deals in Panama and Latin America, sort of coming very close to the United States geographically. Do you trust the strategic goals of China, or are you a little bit worried?
Well, I think they're going to have less money than they have right now because the deal that I'm making, if you look at, we have $250 billion right now at 25%. That means we're going to be taking in billions and billions of dollars, plus I can double that up and then I can double it again. And they could never do what they did in the past with other presidents because, and you see what's happening. I mean, China is, I don't want to do this, but they are not doing very well now compared to what they were doing. And again, I think that we are doing well. We picked up $11.7 trillion in worth since my election, and China's lost a great deal of worth. And we are now a much bigger economy than China, which a lot of people don't know, but we're much bigger and really a much more powerful economy than China.
But as a national security point, you know, with their investment in Latin America and all over the world, it does seem that they're making a bigger footprint around the world.
I know, but they have a debt problem, and they have to pay for that debt. It's a tremendous amount of money that they're spending. Do I like it? Probably not, but I also know it's very expensive for them, and a lot of those places aren't going to work out.
All right. One of the issues of a global economy is climate change. That's a discussion here. What's your position on climate change and how it has an effect on the economy worldwide?
Very simple. I want the cleanest air and the cleanest water on the planet. I want crystal clean water, and that's what we have. We've been doing very well with respect to the environment, and that's what I want. But I'm not going to put the country out of business trying to maintain certain standards that probably don't matter. At the same time, we're going to be a great neighbor to the world, but we have to treat ourselves fairly. So that's the way it is.
Are you going to mention President Xi about climate change?
We'll talk about it. We're talking about a lot of things. Look, the big thing we're talking about is trade. That's what people want to hear. And, you know, he's got to do something with his climate. His climate's a little bit tough, but and I'm sure he will. I think he's a friend of mine. He's a good man, but, you know, we have a little bit of a dispute. And again, our country has been taken advantage of for many years, and that's just not going to happen anymore.
Well, that was VOA contributor Greta Van Susteren speaking with President Trump at the G20 summit in Buenos Aires. And that's our show. Have a good night.
Welcome to English in a Minute. We have already learned a few idioms relating to eyes. Here is another one for you.
See eye to eye.
Do you use this phrase when you look deep into someone's eyes?
Is the yoga class over already?
I left a little early.
Why?
The instructor and I didn't see eye to eye.
You